Welcome to another installment of Overanalyzing Great Movies. Today we will be looking at The Shawshank Redemption. This is a film which has grown a lot in prestige since it came out in 1994. When it first came out, it was given mixed reviews by critics and was considered a box office failure. However, it has gone on to become an extremely popular film, which makes a lot of greatest movies lists, and was rated the greatest movie of all time on IMDb's list. This has sparked a bit of backlash against it from people who feel it can't really be considered a great movie. They feel it is just a simple story of good versus evil, the tale of an innocent man breaking out of prison, something we've all seen before 1,000 times. And even though this time it may be extremely well made, it can't really be considered great. I would argue that there's a lot more to The Shawshank Redemption than meets the eye. But first I'd like to address a fan theory which I found particularly interesting. What if Andy actually was guilty? The movie starts out by showing the events directly before the murders being committed. It shows Andy at the scene of the crime, with the gun and the bullets, staggering towards the house where his wife and her lover were. It then cuts before the actual crime is committed. We flash to Andy's trial, where we hear all the evidence against him. Forensic evidence, the fact that the gun was never found in the river where he claims he threw it, etc. You can really understand why the jury found Andy guilty. He seems incredibly guilty. Now, fans of the movie would argue that Andy wasn't the type to commit a murder like this, but I'm not sure I'd agree with them. The film portrays him as someone who can be a nice guy, but who can also be extremely cold, vengeful, and when he decides he's going to do something, he goes through with it. I can imagine him finding out that his wife had betrayed him and wanting to kill her and her lover. I could also imagine that once he decided to do this, he would go through with it, just like he went through with breaking out of prison. The only thing I find hard to imagine is that he wouldn't have planned to cover up better. While in prison, Andy seems to almost confess to the murder on a couple of occasions. It's well known in Shawshank that if you don't want to admit you did a murder, you say something along the lines of, "The lawyer fucked me." And one time when Andy's asked about the murder he supposedly commits, that's what he says. Later in the film, he tells Red, "I killed my wife," and then when Red looks at him funny, he basically says, "I killed her by not being a better husband." Now I know what you're thinking. What about that whole story of Elmo, Tommy's old cellmate, who actually committed the murder? Doesn't that prove Andy wasn't guilty? Well, to me it doesn't prove anything because I don't think Tommy was very trustworthy there. Tommy worships Andy. He views him as like a father figure. It's possible he made the whole story up just to make Andy feel good and give him hope that he might someday get out of prison. It's also possible that he did have a cellmate who bragged about committing a murder and getting away with it, and he changed the details in his mind to make it sound like Andy's murder. Because he is killed by the warden, we never hear the follow-up about this story. We never hear whether there actually really was an Elmo, or whether it's possible Elmo could have committed Andy's murder. Based on the shadiness of Tommy's story and the overwhelming evidence against Andy, I would honestly still say that it seems like Andy's probably guilty. However, this isn't real life. This is a movie, and a lot of people would argue that it ruins the whole point of the movie if Andy was guilty. And you see, that's where I disagree, because I don't think this was a story of good versus evil. The most famous line from The Shawshank Redemption is, "Get busy living or get busy dying." Not, "I'm innocent" or something like that. This is a movie about people breaking out of circumstances they don't like. And that's why people can connect to it, even people who have never been to prison. Because so many people in the modern world feel imprisoned by the life they live. People feel trapped working jobs they don't feel really connected to, paying mortgages, slowly giving up on their childhood dreams. And as much as we all want to go into our boss and tell him we quit, we know we'd probably end up like Brooks if we did. We're all institutionalized. None of us could really and truly make it on the outside. And that's why watching Andy break out of prison is so inspirational. He was unhappy with his circumstances, and so he changed them. And in doing so, he inspired Red, who didn't believe he could make it on the outside, to believe he could and get out of prison too. We forgive Red for the murder he committed in The Shawshank Redemption. He openly admits he killed someone. Just like we forgive all the other inmates in Shawshank for the crimes they committed. So, even if Andy is guilty, why can't we forgive him? He's clearly paid his time. He's served in this horrible prison for decades. He's done 2 months of solitary confinement. He got mercilessly beaten by a gang of shower rapists. You can't argue that he hasn't been punished. Do I honestly believe that this is what Stephen King and Frank Darabont intended? No. However, I do think it's a fascinating way to interpret the movie, and I kind of like it. It adds another layer of depth and darkness to a film, which may appear shallow on first glance, but if you're willing to look below the surface, is actually quite deep.